Happy New Year to everyone who was assembled here, you and your families. And I'm also thankful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share on this important topic that we would be discussing today. Just give me a few seconds. I'll try to bring up my slides. I hope I'm audible. If there is no, if it is clear and audible, just
yes, sir, you are very
acknowledge.
clear and audible.
Thank you so much. I hope my slides are visible.
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, I think we have about 75 minutes, maybe around 50 minutes or 55. I would like to take you through some of these slides. And the last half an hour, we can spend some time interacting. And as the title goes, I thought of the title in this fashion, looking at lifestyles and aging. I'm sure all of us are more than ever in the last 2 years are reminded of lifestyles and health and well-being in the context of COVID. And particularly, how is it relevant to the communities in the middle-aged and in the elderly? What is it that we can do? What is it that we can learn from some of the recent evidences that is emerging in the fields of integrative medicine and in the field of cognitive neurosciences? Those are the areas that I work with a lot of my collaborators and other researchers. And I thought this is an opportune moment to be able to share those experiences. Just to reveal my other affiliations, I think the introduction spelled it out. Because a lot of what I would be sharing is the learning that I've acquired having worked with all these organizations in various capacities, Karnataka Health Promotion Trust and Artfulness Institute, which is a non-profit organization. I'm a meditation trainer and also a researcher. Me and several other researchers across the world have been researching the impact of meditation on several aspects. I would be sharing some of them through this presentation. A Center for Integrative Health and Wellbeing is an organization I founded with other friends and family members. It's still going on with a very active team. Of course, while I am only advising here and there, but the team itself is taking it forward. And yes, on the neuroscience side, I think Brighter Minds is yet another organization that I provide research input. A book that was read out, it is called Sites and Practice of Integrative Health and Wellbeing. A lot of the details I would be sharing today is captured in more detail in that book, and it's available on Amazon. For those who would like to know more, you're most invited. You're welcome to get a copy. Friends, today I think the presentation I've thought of under these 4 broad headings. First, broadly, I think in the first 10-15 minutes, we look at the current lifestyles and health and well-being, the status of health and well-being today across the world. And in this context, looking at aging and the aging changes that happens, and how does WHO, the World Health Organization, other UN agencies are looking at aging, and what more do we need to do today in the context of aging is something that I would like to talk about. And following these two is as an integrative lifestyle, what is it that we can do? How do we borrow the best from the West and the East? And what is it that we can incorporate within our day-to-day lifestyle is something that I would like to talk about briefly. And lastly, before heading to the interventions, specific focus on brain health and cognition, especially during the middle-aged and elderly age. I think brain takes a lot of beating, and what additional care we can take care in order to sustain a good brain health and cognition is something I would like to talk about. The first part of the presentation, friends, I think we are all familiar with the definition of health by the World Health Organization. It defines a very holistic definition in many ways. It defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Just note down, it says it is a state of complete physical, mental, and social. So not just individual, also the society together, and not just absence of disease or infirmity. We should just remind ourselves that this definition was given out just after the World War II. During that time, the average lifespan across the world was around 30 to 35 years. And mostly people died due to vaccine preventable diseases that are no more lethal today, like polio, the malaria, and diphtheria, pertussis. These communicable diseases led to a lot of disability, and people by 30, 35 years, whether it's a developing country or a developed country, they would die. Pretty much average lifespan was around that. In that context, how do we make people healthy? And despite not having disease or disability was the context in which this definition came out. But subsequently, what happened? In the last decade, with more and more vaccines that emerged, with the antibiotics, also there was a revolution in terms of hygiene and sanitation that happened. Quickly, communicable diseases were conquered, and people were able to live longer. So much so that today, average lifespan is in the 70s. Even Asian and African countries, you see a lifespan averaging around 62, 63. And some of the Western countries go beyond 90s. But average is in 60s and 70s, thanks to all these technological, medical marvels, both clinical and public health, backed by engineering and technological input. And that is what brings us to the relevance of today's topic. Now, more and more we are seeing people living longer, and aged communities are growing, and more so in the West than in the East. Even in places like India and China, in next 20, 30 years, this age group is going to grow much more. In this context, looking at health and well-being beyond just communicable diseases, beyond just preventing them from dying, preventing from disability becomes important. In this context, dear friends, by around 2013, all the global leaders came together from the UN, from the country governments, from the NGOs, the community leaders. They all came together, took stock of where the world is in all areas of development, including the health, and where we should be by 2030. And they formulated what we call sustainable development goals. And under each goal, there are many targets and indicators so that each country, each state, each city can monitor their goals and targets. So the whole idea is by 2030, we and our planet should reach a certain state of sustainable development. That was the whole goal. Within the context of these 17 SDGs, the third SDG refers to health and well-being. It says we all have to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages by 2030. Friends, I would like you to bring your attention to the aspect of well-being. Last 20, 30 years, the idea of well-being is emerging as very, very important. It was always important, but somehow it took a back seat, because 100 years ago, the whole goal of health system was to make people survive longer, to help people to conquer some of the most common communicable diseases. And more interventions went in that line. Well-being somehow took a back seat. But last 20, 30 years, we are seeing as we live longer, now communicable diseases are replaced by what we call non-communicable diseases, like hypertension, diabetes, cancers, mental health issues, many other things. All these are because of living longer, because as we live longer, we age. As the age, wear and tear of the body happens, these diseases open up. They also are attributed to the lifestyles, the kind of eating habits, the kind of activity, the kind of engagement we have with people, with gadgets. All these are also called lifestyle diseases. So more and more, the non-communicable diseases or the lifestyle diseases are emerging. both in the middle-aged and the elderly, in the recent past, even among the young as well. So in this context, well-being becomes more important, or if not more, as important as health itself. And again, well-being is a very complex idea. If you Google, there are so many definitions of well-being you'll come across. I found this particular definition very comprehensive, which looks at physical, mental, intellectual, spiritual, occasional, and social, all aspects of well-being. Even WHO gives away dimensions of health, including spiritual dimension, but from physical to mental, psychological to spiritual. While well-being is looked at in such broad complexity, so holistically, but by and large, the medical marvels, medical inventions are all targeted toward biology, the physiology, the physical dimension. Very less is happening in the inner dimensions. That's precisely where I'm trying to bring attention that there is a need to integrate the modern, the Western, as well as the traditional fields of healing and medicine. In some way, keep this in mind, friends, the health and well-being with all its complexities, with all its dimensions across. That will help in our subsequent exchange and discussions. While non-communicable diseases have replaced communicable diseases as a leading cause of mortality and morbidity, yet every now and then we still see epidemics and pandemics emerging and giving us a reminder that, hey, communicable diseases, we are still around, be careful. And we just saw the onslaught of COVID and we continue to face it even as we speak. And the third wave is almost on the rising within our Indian subcontinent. So in many ways, today, friends, the lifestyles are affecting our lives, not through only non-communicable diseases, also through the communicable diseases. Behind both of them, we see lifestyles are very important, very integral part. And how do we deal with them is something that is of high interest to me over the last few years. And that is something that I would like to explore more today along with you. And lifestyle itself is an idea which we can discuss and deliberate in great detail. And to address this big gap, because a lot of things, discoveries, inventions have happened in terms of curative medicine, in terms of vaccines and drugs, but lifestyle has taken a backseat. But in the last 10 years or so, lifestyle medicine is emerging in a big way. So much so that there is a separate branch in itself within modern medicine, and particularly the American schools is really bringing it up in a big way, trying to make up for what was neglected in the last many decades. And what is lifestyle medicine all about? If you look at it, this particular interactive, clear the visual that I put up on the left side, it has 6 dimensions. One is what is called healthful eating. It's not alien to us. We all refer to nutrition, balanced diet, micro and macronutrients. They all come, and of course, particularly with a focus on whole foods, plant-based foods, because again, in the last a few years, the evidence is cropping up how the plant-based food is more healthy and more helpful. And even in the context of meat industry, the amount of processing that happens, the amount of ingredients that have to go on to be able to really preserve and transport goes a long way in affecting foods, not just non-veg, even the vegetarian foods, in order to store and preserve all the preservatives, they all have its own issues. I don't want to go into the details of it, but just enough to tell you that irrespective of whether you're a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian, but it's important to take into consideration the nutrients, both macro and micro, make sure that it is pretty balanced between fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, as well as the micronutrients, particularly vitamins and minerals. Very important to look at foods coming from a diverse sources, not just from 1 or 2 sources. And that is what we mean when it comes to healthful eating. And predominantly, a good proportion of our diet should be coming from vegetables and fruits, which often is not happening in many of the surveys that we are doing. We don't see that. Next comes the physical activity, and I don't want to talk much because everyone is aware the yoga is happening in a big way, and the gyms are opening up everywhere, and more people, parks and green areas are created for people to walk around. But third point I would like to emphasize, develop strategies to manage stress. Friends, stress has emerged as a part and parcel of everyone's life today. Even the children are not spared. Even people working from home are not spared. Elderly or middle-aged or young, within families or workplaces, stress is universal. And that is giving rise to, I've seen many people with very disciplined dietary behaviors, very disciplined physical activity, yet having high levels of diabetes and hypertension, very easily attributable to stress. And stress again impacting sleep quality, and sleep quality, its effect on immunity and making us vulnerable to the diseases is all aware. I don't want to go into the details. My idea is to really sensitize what we can do about it practically. I want to spend more time on what we can do practically. In addition to the four, what also is stressed by the lifestyle medicine is the relationships. How do we commune? How do we interact within families, the workplaces, in the society? More so in the context of aging, I think social relationships become very important. With three-generation families, we know the complexities within homes. Even the workplaces, the generation gap, the communication gaps in the relationships, how it improves, how it enhances stress and affects health and well-being. Lastly, the substances, I think tobacco or alcohol or other substance abuse, all these come under the broad header of lifestyle medicine, and a lot of effort is going on in terms of bringing this into the curative, into the clinical and public health today, which is a good start, but there is a lot more to do before it is made a part, because while preaching is easy, following it has not been as easy. Most of the times people find it easy to gulp a tablet or take a let us say tonic, rather than adopting something on a daily basis to make it a lifestyle that is healthy enough. It is not easy. People need a great deal of motivation to be able to bring about changes in lifestyle. That is our experience in the clinics that we run through our teams. That's about lifestyle medicine, friends. At this stage, I'd like to put some pointers for everyone's reflection as a pause, just for each of you to introspect as we begin 2022. Still, the whole year is just, can we take stock of, hey, how are we handling our lifestyles today? Within lifestyle medicine, the 6 aspects, how are we doing? Where are we doing better? Where are we not doing well? Then along with lifestyle, when we look at the inner dimension, because all these 6 aspects take care of the physical and biological. What about other emotional? What about psychological? What about the spiritual dimension? What about the social dimension? How do we alter our lifestyles that address our health and well-being in an integrated manner? I think my first part of the presentation comes to an end with these pointers, with this pause. And if there's anything somebody would like to exchange, pass on a comment, most happy. Rather than me speaking alone, we could have these regular interactions. I also see very interesting chat on the comments in the chat box by Dr. Rajiv Vasudevan about Ayurveda's definition of swasthya, which already integrates physical, mental, and spiritual. Yes, very true. That's where I'm a great fan of this traditional school of healing, particularly Ayurveda, because lifestyle, health, disease prevention, and health promotion is already naturally a part of Ayurveda. Thank you for that comment, Dr. Vasudevan. Okay, I'll move on. If there are no more comments and questions, I'll move on. Next part of the
Yeah, I
presentation.
just wanted to say something, Professor Krishnamurthy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the way we handle our lifestyle, it has a lot to do with what is the situation around us. I mean, some things which are not, it's not possible to deal with them. Some things which are kind of, put on us. I mean, how do we do like that? We are incapable of changing the situations around us many a times. So perhaps that is what is leading to the certain types of lifestyles, and a change in the lifestyles as from last 100 years, it has taken.
That's a great point, Dr. Lalita. I think you're very right. Somehow, the ecosystem or the environment, whether internal or outside, from outside, has somehow pushed us. And we're so conditioned. For example, if we walk into a supermarket to buy vegetables, to buy fruits, I don't have a say in terms of what is organic, what is not organic. So the whole ecosystem itself has changed a lot, and I have very minimal choices. Despite that, in the subsequent slides, I would like to bring out some experiences, some evidence where we can start, at least within ourselves at an individual level, within our families at a family level, slowly within the communities where we live. We should be able to do something. That's the purpose of my presentation. But it's good to keep that point in our heads that, yes, a lot of conditioning has already happened. And in order to change that, I need to be very, very motivated, self-motivated myself. And along with me, several others have to come together and be able to join hands. And slowly, for myself and for others, we can bring about that change. I agree with you. Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Shall I move on?
Yes,
I'll
please.
Bring back my slides.
Yeah.
Now I move on to the second header of my presentation under aging and aging process or changes. Just a second. Okay. When I say the changes as a result of aging, what do I mean? Aging can induce changes at several levels. We're all familiar at a biological level or a physiological level. When I say my eyes start blurring during 40s and 50s, my joints start hurting, maybe in my 50s due to hormonal changes, or maybe my thinking and my memory lapses that I see late 40s and early 50s. All these are biological because somewhere in the brain neurons are giving away. There is changes happening in the back of the eye, and likewise my respiratory system, the lungs, the heart, the kidney system. Slowly, the blood vessels, slowly there's a wear and tear, and it's very natural to experience these biological changes. Secondly, it's psychological. As a result of these biological changes, it can have a great impact on my mind, on my confidence. Suddenly, let us say, when I experience lapses in memory, I start panicking, I become anxious, which we see very commonly in our aged population. Often, the middle-aged or the younger generation is not familiar with what's happening, but it's good for them to know there is a biological change happening, which is inflicting a change on the mind, on the psychological level. That means more assurance, more confidence becomes important that we need to give to the elders. But this is common, sometimes so much so that it can lead to depression, anxiety, obsession, if not checked. And particularly the dementia, as we see when the brain changes resulting in memory lapses, can even lead to changes in personality. And psychological changes can be very severe, and many families go through enormous stress, both the individual as well the family. And this leading to behavioral changes. Suddenly our behaviors, sometimes we see our elders again becoming like babies, becoming like children, sometimes throwing tantrums, sometimes being very adamant, sometimes being very obsessive. A lot of times people don't know what's happening, but behind it, there are biological change, the psychological change, which is influencing the behavioral change. And this, of course, also has an effect on the social level as well. Suddenly, when walking into the roads, into the society, the confidence is low and a lot more, and both within families and outside, there can be effects. So broadly, I think we can see changes under these levels. An interesting insight, I would like you all to keep this in your minds as we talk of age. The three different types of age that is referred to in various texts: the biological age, the chronological age, and the psychological age. What are they? Biological, as I already said, is also called physiological age. It basically how healthy the body is, how active the body is, irrespective of the chronological age. For example, if somebody is 65-year-old as per the birth year, but he or she may be as active and fit as a 45-year-old. On contrary, a 45-year-old chronologically may appear like a 65-year-old. So keep this in mind, friends. And this biological age is something that is in my control. It depends on lifestyle factors, diets that we consume, stress and sleeping patterns. Of course, genetics also plays a huge role. Particularly, I don't know if you're familiar with the chromosomes in our cells. On the chromosomes, tip of the chromosomes, we have cap-like structures called telomeres. So the length of telomere reflects how healthy and how long I can live. So genetics can have influence on the telomere length, but in the last 20 years, the science is showing, the field of epigenetics is showing that can be changed. A number of studies, including yoga, meditation, others, can have epigenetic influence, can even have a change on the genetic makeup. I would like to talk about one such study that some of our friends undertook. So, but that is about biological. Yes, it is under our control if we can control some of these things we are talking about. Then comes psychological age. Psychological age is all about how one feels, how one acts and behaves. As I said earlier, suddenly a 75-year-old can suddenly become like a baby, can throw a tantrum, can become very adamant. We all often see that. So there is chronological age, there's a biological age, then there is psychological age. And I just keep this in mind as we talk of some of the interventions that we will touch upon later. Particularly about the psychological age, I would like to throw some more light as what we have discovered through our research work, both through literature review as well as some of our primary research. A lot of brain changes happen and it inflicts, as I said, psychological health or mental health. What happens late 30s, as early as late 30s, certainly in 40s and 50s, we can start seeing the changes in the brain. You all know the brain is made of few billion brain cells called neurons. And the neurons connect with one another. That is what happens in a young born, in the childhood, right through the adolescence. Because a lot of these brain neurons are connecting with each other. More strongly they're connected. That is what will contribute to my learning, to my memory, and to my reasoning, to my problem-solving abilities. This all comes under the idea of cognition. And the front part of the brain, the frontal cortex, is mainly involved in this process of cognition. But somewhere as we age, the neurons in the frontal cortex start loosening up. The connections that were there earlier slowly start loosening up. Now, the connections that were very strong will continue to remain. For example, I can think of an example. Somebody in their younger age had a very deep emotional connect with someone that was lying underneath, but that person was very busy in his other work life, family life, and very busy earning livelihood, running life for families and helping. So let us say in 40s, late 40s and 50s, now slowly the neurons start giving way in the cognition part. But the emotional connect in some other part of the brain is still strong. Now suddenly in 50s and 60s, these emotions start dominating. Uncontrollable emotions sometimes, uncontrollable feelings sometimes. So what does it mean? During our younger formative years, the brain connections we make, what are very strong and solid, they will remain for long. What is weak and less solid will give way. Then the ones that are strong will reign supreme. Now we have to be very careful and choosy when we can still act. What connections do we want to carry strongly into our elderly? How can we age gracefully? That is what comes under the idea of cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is nothing but the connections, the brain connections, the cognitive reserve as a result of the brain connections I form during my younger age, during my middle age. Even I can continue to build even in my middle age and elderly age. If I work on it, I can still build my reserve. More I build, more I can carry. So keep these ideas in mind, friends. Cognitive decline is there because it's natural for the decline to happen. That's why we see the changes in memory and other changes resulting in dementia, be it Alzheimer's or Parkinsonism or others. But studies have shown if we can build a good cognitive reserve, no time is late to start building a cognitive reserve. Even now, 50s, 60s, or 40s, I can work on it. 70s, I can still work on it. It's all about me making a choice and willfully building the right connections, the right reserve, and that decides my psychological age, my mental health, friends. I'll just pause here if you have any questions so far.
Sir, I'm C.V. Shastri speaking.
Yes, sir.
I feel that there is a very thin line between biological age and psychological age. How to distinguish? Can you please elaborate? I am not from the medical side, so obviously, I mean.
When I heard that, I was very happy, and I want to congratulate you because there are very few lucky ones whose biological age and chronological age are very, very aligned.
Okay.
But very often, sir, in today's generation, we see people are aging fast. Right in 30s, they have all the gray hair. In fact, I am one such example. Very early, my head started graying a lot. We see hypertension very early now. Imagine last year we saw in late 30s, somebody dying of stroke. That means the heart was already weak. The blood hypertension was high. Somebody in the age of 25, 28, they have sleepless nights, which is common, let us say, in elderly age. So this is the conflict. But I would like to congratulate your generation. Your generation was a very disciplined generation, pretty healthy generation. You knew when you did business, When you're at home, you were at home. So that's where probably your biological and chronological age very aligned. But then there is one other thing that you can think. There are people, chronologically, they are 65 or 75, but they can think as fast as if they are 45 or 35. They're so creative, they're so dynamic, they're so very full of life and energy. So I would like to put these three contexts before everyone to get an idea. And there is no scientific way of doing this because very subjective. For each one, it can be different. But I would like you all to, just as Dr. Shastri did for himself, each of you take a moment and look at, hey, what is my chronological age? Is my biological age younger or older?
Mine is 81.
Sorry?
I'm 81.
Brilliant. We can certainly say where you are, sir. And since sir was quick in doing, others I would like to invite. Thirdly, map the psychological age as well. Psychological age compared to chronological age. Are we growing in wisdom as we age? Are we becoming more and more mature? Are we becoming more and more wise? Am I earning more respect from the younger ones, or is it the other way around? Friends, it's an important assignment at the end of the day or tomorrow morning after your meditation session. Take a minute or two and map it out, and then you can look at where do we work upon? How do I work upon? It is a very personal exercise, very subjective. There is no standard way of doing this. Well, there are some scales that we can see, but none of them are validated. So I don't want you to just go around searching for tools. Nothing like you doing it for yourself, purely for yourself. Look at it that way.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir. I'll come back to my slides. So, friends, World Health Organization declared the decade that we are living today between 2021 and 2030 as the decade of healthy aging, because aging population is growing.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Agrawal from Lucknow. I was just referring this biological and chronological age. As in the past time, or in old times, the biological age was, for example, 60. And people used to think that we are old now. So we need not to do anything and we are just sitting now. But now the biological age is not like that. We keep on doing things. We want to be active. We want to be in life. We are wanting to do things which we have not done in the past. So this is the biological age now we are passing through.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. Thank you. I'll just continue. We'll have some discussion at the end. So I was just telling all of you, friends, the World Health Organization has declared this decade as decade of healthy aging. What does it say what does it invite all of us to look at? Changing how we think, feel, and act towards age and ageism. Ageism is a very interesting word. It's all about what people think about elderly. You can almost say it's the kind of judgment, prejudice that generally people may have towards any particular age, whether children or the elderly. But how do we bring a positive constructs around it is what WHO is inviting all of us. Secondly, developing communities. It's not just one or two people, one or two families. All of us have to come together as a community to foster the abilities of older people. Thirdly, how do we deliver person-centered integrated care? Because each individual is unique. Each person's issues is unique. And how do we deliver person-centered integrated care? Fourthly, how do we help people access quality care for long term? These are some of the thought process, the guidelines WHO is given out to all the countries and all the health and other sectors to be able to think and come together, because as of now, our health systems, our societies isn't really elderly friendly. We can't think of our elders crossing the roads today. It's all made for vehicles, not even for human beings. But how do we make them more elderly friendly? How do we make societies, communities more elderly friendly? So there is a great deal of transformative thinking we have to bring in at many levels. And that is what is invited by the WHO. Again, the science, the evidence gives rise to factors that influence healthy aging. First of all, our physical health. For example, metabolic disorders, be it hypertensive disorders, or the diabetes, the cardiovascular, mental health, they also have impact on how healthy or unhealthy my aging process will be. Lifestyles, we talked of lifestyles, our eating habits, our travel, our physical activity. Are we doing more or less? Sometimes I often see people trying to do more and more. They don't want to give up that I'm getting old, but should we not be realistic? Somewhere we have to have that, I would say, discrimination. As my body is aging, can I customize my activity to be in line with the aging? So lifestyle itself is very dynamic. I cannot have a fixed lifestyle for next 20, 30 years. Year after year, it has to change and become very dynamic. Physical environment and social environment, I talked about it earlier. How our physical and social environment can be more friendly toward the elderly is something that we all have to give a thought of. So in this context, friends, I would like to bring this idea of integrative lifestyle. Just having lifestyle change is not enough. Can we have an integrative lifestyle? What does it mean? I spoke about health and well-being having so many dimensions. Now, in order to touch all dimensions of health and well-being, from physical to the inner spiritual, should we not have an integrative lifestyle? This is some of the work that we did as a part of a Center for Integrative Health and Well-being, where we advocated for an integrative lifestyle that integrates modern medicine or lifestyle medicine, Ayurveda, yoga, and meditation, because all put together can really make it more holistic, can touch from the body till the spirit. That is what is integrative lifestyle. This is what prompted me to write that book, and which I published in 2020. And a lot of details can be found. Ultimately, what is it that makes my lifestyle holistic? How do I address each aspect of my lifestyle? And while modern medicine gives the standards of care based on the best evidence, is that enough? Is there more that we need to add? That's where Ayurveda, yoga, meditation come into picture. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about Ayurveda, because this is something that some of us have been exploring for a while, and I've been interacting with my very good friend, Dr. Gangadharan, in MS Ramaya Ayurveda Indic Center, very eminent Ayurveda Acharya. And of course, many other Ayurvedic doctors that I work through our other clinics, CISW and others. I found this very fascinating because in modern medicine, we aren't taught this. In modern medicine, it's all about standards of care. Everybody is same, and we can have a standard diet, standard lifestyle, standard drugs. But Ayurveda looks at it very differently and uniquely. It believes each human being is unique. Each of us have a unique body-mind constitution. And when this constitution deviates from the original, that's when the disease manifests. The constitution that I'm born with is called Prakriti. When it deviates, it becomes Vikruti. That is the beautiful theory and that Ayurveda relies on. And each of us, when we are born with a particular constitution as a result of many factors. The constitution of the mother and the father, the constitution of the place where I was born, the time I was born, and the season, and many other things, they all result in my original constitution. And now this constitution can change as a result of aging. A child will have a different constitution. In the middle age, I will have a different constitution. When I become elderly, my body constitution will change. Even during the day, during summer, or when the sun is out, or there's a winter, at the end of the day, the constitution of the atmosphere, environment is different. Constitution can also change because of the foods that we eat, the kind of activity or the lifestyle I adopt. So constitution is so dynamic, friends, and without knowingly, unknowingly, we may be affecting our constitutional balance, which gives rise to disease. That is where Ayurveda comes with this idea of how do we fix your lifestyle? How do you make your lifestyle very dynamic? As per your age, your lifestyle should change. the foods you eat should change. As per your age, the activity nature should change. And things like that, very dynamic recommendations. And Ayurveda again relies on assessing the nadi or the pulse and to decide the constitution and then recommends. And I would certainly like each of you to try as an experiment, meet with the Ayurveda doctor nearby, try and find out what your constitution is. And for your current constitution, what are the foods you should eat? What are the lifestyle practices you should adopt? What kind of activity you should do? Find out and see how differently you can organize your lifestyle. That is something I would like to suggest. And Ayurveda also relies, if we don't set it right, because we accumulate a lot of toxins. Every other day, knowingly, unknowingly, the foods that we eat, the activity that we do, it results in these toxins. Again, Ayurveda believes in being very practical. It recommends once in a while the detox therapies, the panchakarma, the 5 different types of detox. It's all about every now and then detoxifying our bodies so that I can restore my constitution. I think this is something very, very interesting. Of course, we have Dr. Vasudevan there toward the end. Some of you would like to know more. I'm sure he will be happy to clarify. Next, I would like to move on, friends, after Ayurveda, because I being a meditation practitioner and trainer for more than 25 years, not only with my experience, now I'm also researching meditation. Even in Bangalore, we have had collaborations with the NIMANS and doing some meditation studies. Also with other researchers across the US and Europe, we are collaborating and undertaking many research projects as to how the meditation can impact. In these 2-3 studies around heartfulness meditation, because I am a heartfulness meditation trainer, and where we meditate on the heart and what kind of impact it has had on stress, on well-being is something. This study was done by NIMANS 2 years ago. We looked at short-term meditators and long-term meditators, and we looked at comparing the well-being and cognition. And we could see significant differences in how the long-term meditators experienced positive life events, confidence, and many other aspects of well-being. Another study by my friend and colleague, Dr. Jairam Timapuram, he is a US-based researcher. We did this study in his hospital, looking at how heartfulness meditation can impact stress, burnout, and telomere length among doctors and nurses. Very interesting, within 8 weeks of the heartfulness practice, he observed that the burnout stress came down significantly. And very, very interesting finding, the telomere length was increasing. A very slight increase in the telomere length was observed. So many other theories are there prior to where meditation or even the change in the environment can have impact on the body genetic constitution. The field of epigenetics is an upcoming field in the last 20-30 years, but this is one of the first studies within heartfulness context where we were able to detect how meditation can impact the telomere length on the chromosomes and thereby impacting the psychological health. This is another study did by the same author, Dr. Jairam Timapuram in US, both among the doctors and the patients who were on sleep medication. They were not able to sleep without the sleep medication. And they were taken through 8 weeks of heartfulness practice. And by the end of 8 weeks, 73% of the patients were withdrawn from sleep medication. And even the doctor, physicians gave very positive reports of how meditation can impact sleep. Why I'm bringing this evidence before all of you is, these are some things available free of cost. They're so easily accessible. All that it requires is to be able to find the time and practice, and we can easily impact our psychological health. In this context, I would like to take a little bit of deviation. If you see all the proponents of yoga, all the great yoga teachers, despite getting very old, if you see, they were growing in confidence. They were growing in peace and balance, self-esteem, the wisdom, all attributed to the meditation and yoga. So that's the kind of profound impact this meditation can have. And it really helps us to age very gracefully. And that is where I would like to encourage, how do you make this a part of your lifestyle? I would like you to think about it and invite you to experience and explore as an experiment for the first few months and see it for yourself. I'd like to add some very interesting piece of evidence emerging in the last few, I would say 1 or 2 decades, thanks to the neuroscience research, which is advancing greatly as a result of radio imaging investigations. We are able to peep into the brains and look at how one brain is different from the other brain. A brain that has meditated for long, what kind of changes we can see as compared to a brain that has not meditated, and things like that, because of which we are able to arrive at various factors that can enhance cognitive reserve, rather factors that can inhibit cognitive decline and even can protect against dementia and other psychological changes. What are they? Very interesting, these 4 or 5 things pop out very strongly. One is, of course, education and occupational attainment. If we have good education and some very good occupation, and it certainly has shown a great impact on cognitive reserve. Secondly, people having high purpose, high vision in life. They seem to be very motivated lot. They carry a lot more cognitive reserve into their elderly age. Social interaction. I think continuing to be interactive socially with other friends and other members. A lot of times as we age, I've seen many elders becoming very withdrawn, aloof, that actually fast tracks cognitive decline. Rather coming out of the shell, interacting, that way technology is helpful also. Nowadays we can see elders interacting on WhatsApp and social media, but just make sure that you don't overdo it, because overdoing Facebook and social media, WhatsApp can again impact cognition and make us again induce memory lapses and attention deficits. There's a moderate amount that we need to do, and we need to learn it. We need to find it out for ourselves. Yes, learning new skill or a new language or learning music or a dance or things like this, something new can challenge the brain, and again, it can enhance the cognitive reserve. So things like that, friends. I think this is something that I'm not speaking offhand. It's come from a lot of evidence. And in fact, a very interesting study I was reviewing a few years earlier, there were many nuns who, after their death, there was a postmortem analysis of their brains. Very interestingly, they saw that these nuns lived longer. They didn't succumb to any of these regular changes as a result of dementia. And then they were able to realize, because of the kind of life they lived, the volunteerism, the social service, high purpose, and prayers and meditations, that is what led to their healthy brains, is what was the conclusive evidence from that paper. So this is all about theory, friends. In next few slides, what I would like to really propagate or advocate, both from my experience and through research, is how can you bring about a lifestyle change through meditation? I'd like to take a minute and talk about the Artfulness meditation practice, which is based on Raja Yoga system of meditation, been there for more than 100 years as a very formal organized system, school of teaching, and free of charge. Training is offered free of charge around more than 200 countries worldwide. It has 4 practices, basic practices called relaxation, the meditation in the morning, the cleaning in the evening, and the bedtime inner connect. Just these 3-4 practices, which require about 60 minutes in the entire day, can have a transformative, life-changing effect. In addition, there are also interventions to look at stress detox, fear detox, anger detox. You can find more information on the website that I'm putting up there. It also is offered online. You can download a Hearts app, and you can access all these services free of charge, even from the comfort of your home and wherever you live. Just a point, because so much science and philosophy is there, how can we integrate this into my lifestyle? It is one thought I would like to leave in your minds to ponder over. Second, as I said earlier, I'm also a research advisor with Brighter Minds, and some of my research team members have put up a very interesting training called Restart. Restart is for the elderly to restart their life again with freshness, with joy, with health, with the positivity. And of course, it's a very simple 5 session over a 15 hours for anybody above 35, because we also want in the middle-aged and even as early as 35 to start thinking about their lifestyle and start caring for themselves, so they can build a good cognitive reserve and they can really carry a rich reserve as they go. It's something like the insurance or the bank balance that we do. And for more information, please feel free to visit the Brighter Minds website. Our research team has put up a lot of blogs and information there for you to read through and gain more information. With that, I come to the end of my slides. And for more information, I just put for Ayurveda services or the integrative lifestyle support, the Artfulness and Brighter Minds. Feel free to reach out. And yes, I talked about the book earlier. For more information, if you like to read and go it, a lot of science is something that I've touched upon there. Feel free to look at it. With that, let me stop sharing. In the last 15-20 minutes, I'll be happy to discuss with you.